Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Eat, or welcome to Let's Eat if this is your first time tuning in to Let's Eat. Let's set the scene a little bit this morning. It is the morning. In fact, you might be able to hear it in my voice, but we are at the dining room table. It is a very rainy morning, which is a personal favorite of mine. And I have with me a bone broth hot chocolate, some filtered water with lemon and salt, and an Americano with a splash of organic heavy cream and a splash of whole milk. So, to say I'm in an ideal situation right now would be an understatement, honestly. I have my blanket on. We are ready to talk my lab results from functional testing. I shared yesterday on Instagram about some of my results and my intentions to share about the results. And then I realized this would probably be better suited for a podcast episode simply for the fact that it's a long explanation. My session with the other FDN who led me through my results was about almost 2 hours long. And that is essentially what a session will look like when I review results with clients, simply for the sake of the fact that there are lots of results to review. So to do that on Instagram just feels a little bit cumbersome. And I don't think anyone would want to tune in to that necessarily. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. That would just be a lot. So I said, you know what, let me make this a podcast episode instead. I am thinking I'll probably end up doing just a few of the tests and sharing the results and kind of explaining what these tests are showing. And then I can, give you a good understanding of what functional testing will look like and what information it can provide you and why you might be a good candidate for it. The point of myself doing these tests and all the trainees doing the tests is not only for us to have the opportunity to understand our health better, because obviously we have an interest in health and we're going to be helping others. And so it makes sense that we need to be able to administer and experience the tests on ourselves. And then from there, being able to sit with somebody who has experience doing these sessions and works in the field and being able to understand how a session unfolds, how the flow goes. Now, every person's different and everyone's going to structure their sessions a little bit differently, right? But it was nice to be able to sit there and be the client and listen to this person talk with me about all the things that I've been learning, but for my personal health and my body, and then also to be able to see the process unfold in real time, as opposed to what I've just been learning through the modules and through the lectures and whatnot. So it was really neat to kind of see it all come together. And so I'm going to do my best to break it down to you as concisely as I can in today's episode. Like I said, I'll probably just do a couple of the tests because I really want to be sure I'm sharing in depth. And then I'll make this a couple episode long series. I'll just continue to record episodes for the next couple weeks so that as soon as testing does become available, you know what you're getting into. If you were on the fence about it, you can make a decision based on what I'm about to share. And obviously, if you think that it might be right for you and you want to learn more, you can always schedule a call with me. I plan to start taking consults for testing early June is my plan. And you're more than welcome to also join my inquiry list that is in the show notes. I started this list in April just to start to get a feel for what is the interest, what's everyone want, what are the concerns, what are the areas that, people are struggling with. And that's been a really great tool and resource for me to prepare myself, number one, but also just to get an understanding of who's out there, who is looking for support, and how might I be able to be that support for them. And I've also been sending emails over the past couple weeks with updates if you were on that list. So that list is not necessarily a commitment by any means. It's more of just a temporary wait list, we'll call it, for you to get information. And then you can opt out if you decide this isn't for you, it's not the right time, or you can dive in. And that's my hope because I love this work. I find it so incredibly powerful, and I'm certain it can change your life. It can change your health. It's pretty amazing. So Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. We're going to explore a couple different tests this morning and talk a little bit about what it shows, what it means for me, how it correlates to my daily experience. And I'm excited to share with you all what's been going on. So, welcome to the table. Let's eat. Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, certified holistic health coach, functional nutrition expert, and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the space within which we become well. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, self-development, gut health, mental health, and more. I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. So I'm recording this episode pre-puppy coming home. The puppy comes home this weekend, and I thought about it this morning or yesterday. I was thinking, should I just batch all of my episodes for the next couple weeks so that they're done and I don't have to worry about them when the puppy is around? Now, it will obviously be so much fun having her here, and I'm planning to get back to video episodes sooner rather than later. I think because of the beginning of the year being so chaotic with everything that happened with Lou, and season 2 literally released the week I found out she was sick. So everything after that through the month of February was just a blur, and I just got episodes out. I don't know how I did it, but I did, and it's so much easier for me to just record this way, audio wise, as opposed to coordinating on camera and so forth. But I do love doing those episodes. So I'm guessing that because I will be having a special guest with me, and I'm sure all of you want to see said guest, I will get back to video episodes in the coming weeks, and she will join us because why wouldn't I let her be on camera and be in these episodes? She's gonna, she'll be the best part of the episode. So that is my tentative plan. As far as podcasting goes, as an aside, obviously today's episode is about functional health. I have a guest episode coming in a couple weeks, but I'm also planning to release a 2-part series on holistic pet care. I did start recording that last week, I think it was. I was so excited. I'm just about done with the book, and I'm so excited to share on this, but I realized there's just no possible way for me to condense everything into just one episode. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but for me, given the tangents that I go on and how much information there is, I don't think it's possible. So instead of putting that stress and that pressure on myself, we're just going to stretch it out into 2 episodes. So the first episode is just going to be informative. It's just going to be about the pet care industry, about what's impacting our pets' health, all of that. And then the second episode is going to be a more application episode, and that will be all about what we can be doing to support our dog's health, given all of the information I had just shared. So that is going to be the plan there. I think I'm going to have to do an entirely separate episode talking about how I'm approaching the puppy's health, and I'm referring to her as Puppy because I still don't have a name. So if I had a name, I would be telling you the name because you're a podcast listener, so you get all the information before anyone else. I did call the vet yesterday to make an appointment for next week, and she's like, "So what's the puppy's name?" And I was like, I do not know the puppy's name, so just put her in as Puppy." But it was really sweet. I think I said my name, and I said, "I'm bringing home a puppy this weekend," and the receptionist was like, that's really good to hear. I'm really happy to hear that." And she ended up referring to Lulu in our call, so I know she, meant that from a place of, I know kind of what you went through, and that she was happy to hear that. So that was nice. And speaking of that, I am going to be seeing the vet that I brought Lou to when Lou was a puppy, and then also at the end of her life when she was dealing with cancer. I had transitioned to a different vet that ended up not working out. Wasn't happy with that experience. So this vet I love, and she was so graceful and so thoughtful and kind throughout the whole process with Lou. And while I wanted to go see a functional vet, which I still plan to do, I do need to bring her in to see a vet. And it's just, I've been having trouble finding one, and it's just the very last minute. I need to get an appointment on the calendar. So I said, you know what, let me just take her here and then I'll worry about it afterwards. So that is the plan. I'm sorry, now I'm getting off track. But yeah, those are upcoming episodes. I think pretty much the month of June is all squared away from a podcast perspective around topics, and I'm excited. So it's going to be a lot of functional health for dogs and functional lab testing. And then I have one guest in between there. And so it's going to be a fun month. It's going to be good. And I think it's perfect timing because that's when testing will kind of take flight and get started. And so it's a busy month ahead, but it's all good. And I'm really excited to see what's next. Okay, so let me get back on track. I'm already 10 minutes into this episode and I'm not even, I haven't even scratched the surface. So let's get our head on straight here. So today we're going to be talking about the stress and hormone profile and the metabolic wellness profile. So the tests are going to be looking at, as far as the stress and hormone profile, we'll be looking at our cortisol. This is a huge, huge marker, and I think it's a very trendy topic nowadays in social media. Everyone wants to lower their cortisol. Everyone is demonizing cortisol. Everyone's talking about cortisol. And so we're looking at cortisol and then cortisol in relation to DHEA. And then we're also going to be looking at our sex hormones. So we're going to be looking at estradiol, which is a form of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We're also going to be looking at melatonin. And we're going to be looking at all of these hormones also in relation to each other. So I'll probably spend the bulk of the time focused on cortisol, and then we'll move into some of these other hormones. And then the metabolic wellness profile is a metric or contains markers, we'll say, of digestion, detoxification, liver health, and that arena of health, and then oxidative stress. And so overall, just these two tests alone can show a ton. Now, complementary to these tests is a few others that are going to look at either immune health, they're going to look at our microbiome, right? So there's other tests that are included in the foundational package that are also going to supplement these two first tests. So I never want to look at them in isolation. We always have to consider them as the whole picture. However, for today, for time purposes, we're going to focus on these first two tests. These two first tests are also the ones that I'm going to be tested on next week. So I've been really kind of focused in on them. So it's really exciting to now see it in my own life and see it in my own results, and then be able to also break it down and interpret it now with the exam I'll be taking on Monday. Now, most of these exams are oral exams. They're not written exams. I do have one written exam, and that's something I've been working on ongoingly. But for the most part, a lot of these are more like case studies where in real time we're working with a mentor, we'll say. I'm choosing to stay with the same mentor that I've been working with since the start, just because you have the option to switch up people that you work with. I'm like, why would I do that? Let me just stick with the same person. I feel comfortable with her. I know her now. She did my results on Monday, so I'm just going to keep that going because we have good rapport. And I feel like that makes me feel better knowing I'm working with someone that like I've joked with, and now we're like kind of, warmed up to each other. And so hopefully she'll go easy on me as a result of that. No, I'm just kidding. No, but not really kidding. Totally not kidding. But you know what I'm saying. So I'm meeting with her on Monday for this exam, and it's going to be an oral exam where I lead her through her results, quote unquote, as an FDN. And we're looking at these two tests specifically. So to get started, you will complete, I'm going to talk to you as if you are a client. You will complete the metabolic chaos scorecard and a lifestyle and medical history form. So the metabolic chaos, oh my God, why do I keep saying it wrong? Metabolic chaos scorecard is a way for you to quantify your subjective experience. And I love saying it that way because that is a perfect way of describing it. We're essentially putting numbers to your subjective symptoms, because obviously what I find to be painful might not be painful to you. What I find to be mild might not be mild to you. And so by being able to put numbers to it, while it's not a perfect way to really completely streamline, we'll say, or, unify the experience, it still gives us a good understanding when we're putting numbers to your symptoms to understand what are the symptoms that are most problematic for you. So the focus is on what we call hidden stressors. So that's an acronym. Hidden is an acronym. And this focuses on hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, nervous system, and oxidative stress. And these hidden stressors are the areas of dysfunction that may present and what we might be able to uncover via the testing. So in the metabolic chaos scorecard, you are answering to the symptoms that are listed and rating them on a scale from 0 to 5, 0 being not present, 5 being severe, and then we're able to total up your score. And we're able to use this as an opportunity to what we call clinically correlate. When we say clinically correlate, that is our way of taking a look at what your experience is, right? What you yourself are experiencing, because obviously you're coming to us with symptoms. You wouldn't be coming to us if you're like, yeah, everything's great. Like, I feel awesome. There's obviously something going on. And then being able to look at the test results and say, all right, this might be a byproduct of that, right? This might explain that. That helps you not only better understand your results when you're able to make those connections, but it also gives us a target area, right? And it's not always going to be perfect. Sometimes there are symptoms you're experiencing that don't clinically correlate with the results, and that's just a part of everyone being so individual and everyone presenting differently. But a lot of times there are tremendous overlap, and that allows us to identify these what we call healing opportunities so that we can obviously best support you and address these issues hopefully once and for all. So the symptoms are very widespread. There's probably 30 to 40 symptoms within each category. So this is a document that I will send you before we get started. So you'll fill this out. There's also different columns that indicate this is what I'm experiencing now, this is what I experienced in the past, and then it also allows us to compare your scores to retesting in the future. So it's a great way to keep everything organized. And obviously, ideally, what you're experiencing now, hopefully, is maybe better than what you experienced in the past, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes we see those scores increasing, right? Oftentimes we see the scores from the past at like a 2, and then now it's like a 4. And that is typical just because now you're getting to a point where you are seeking out this person or myself for the help because things aren't getting better. They're in fact getting worse. And we want to know that. We want to know, what was it like a year ago or what changed? I think this can also give us a good understanding of, I just had a client sign up for testing. We're going to start working together. And she was telling me that her symptoms worsened when she moved into a different home. And that I think is very telling. There's a number of reasons why certain symptoms or certain experiences can evolve when we're moving, whether it's the stress or what's in that environment that maybe is aggravating your body. Are you exposed to mold? Or, what is it that's going on that suddenly you moved and now you're noticing you're feeling differently, or these certain symptoms are appearing. So this can also be a way for us to kind of make those connections a little bit that, oh, I had this trauma and then I started to experience X, Y, and Z. That's when things got worse for me, right? I think that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just the inflammation kind of persisted for so long that the symptoms intensified and worsened, and that can be the nature of what happened. But there also might be some contextual information that could be helpful. So then alongside the metabolic chaos scorecard, we have the lifestyle and medical history form. And that essentially is a place for you to input medications you're taking, supplements you're taking, main concerns, and then similar to the metabolic chaos scorecard, you're going to fill out the remaining document around your lifestyle. So it's kind of a similar thing where you're rating things on a scale from 0 to 5, I believe it is, and you're saying, oh, eats processed foods. That's, strong. I do that a lot, or that happens never, so I'll give it a 0. Right? And you're looking at that that through nutrition, you're looking at that through sleep, through exercise, through stress levels. It's a pretty comprehensive questionnaire for us as the practitioner to really understand your lifestyle and understand, okay, we have these symptoms, we have these test results, and now let's look at where they're at, what their foundation looks like, so that we essentially know where we're starting. And we can also maybe make some quick fixes here. It's not to say quick fixes in the sense of, oh, I'm going to change something and overnight it's going to be better. But if you see this person is not drinking enough water, or you see that they're eating predominantly fried food, or they're not moving their bodies, this gives us information as to where we'll get started from a protocol standpoint, but it can also be something that someone changes and what a difference it can make in how they're feeling. I mean, obviously test results are valuable and it shows deeper rooted issues, but sometimes these things can be mitigated by just making better choices over the course of a day. So that helps to obviously orient ourselves to the landscape of our clients and to understand who they are and what they're choosing and what they're doing. And obviously it has some more specific questions for women around their cycles and around men, around, sexual dysfunction and so forth. And so it does a really great job at acclimating the clinician, or the practitioner rather, to the client and their current life circumstances. And then it obviously gives us information as to where they might need more support. I think a lot of times too, people who are coming down this path, they're already doing what they think is all the right things. And it's really the testing that helps them to uncover. So it's not so much, oh, they're continuing to eat or live a certain way, and that's what's causing all these issues. It can be that, but a lot of times people are heading in this direction because they feel they've tried everything and now they need further support. So that allows us then to see, okay, if they are eating all the right things and they are moving their body and they're, doing all quote unquote the necessary steps to be what we would suspect as being healthy, and they're still not feeling okay, then obviously there's a deeper rooted issue that's there. And so it goes both ways. There are areas for us to focus on for people who need improvement in these foundational arenas. And then there's also more information for us to say, okay, there must be dysfunction there because clearly they are taking care of themselves, but for whatever reason, they're just not feeling well. So, on the stress and hormone profile, we will talk first about cortisol. I have my test results pulled up, and I'll kind of walk you through what the test results reflect, what exactly it means. Now, cortisol is our main stress hormone. Like I said before, I feel like everyone's heard of it. It's very trendy. It's very, hyped up right now. I think a lot of people are fixated on it and feel that we all need to lower our cortisol, or we all have chronic high cortisol. And while I agree to some extent, I think it deserves more attention simply for the sake of the fact that we live in a world, the modern world, that is incredibly stressful, and we are constantly bombarded with not only psychological but also physiological stress. And so I think more consideration does need to be made to it, but I think we're just doing it wrong. I think we're just approaching it poorly, and I'm not surprised because it's either because of what we see on social media and people promoting inaccurate or inappropriate guidance around it, or our healthcare doesn't do a really great job at approaching it either. So typically speaking, when you're going to your doctor, you're going to get a blood test and you're going to see 1 point of cortisol. And that's likely in the morning, or depending on, I guess I can't generalize it. It's going to be whenever you take the blood, right? So ideally, a more appropriate avenue to test cortisol is via saliva. That is going to show us a better picture of what's going on versus what we'll see in blood. And then also, what is incredibly valuable is seeing cortisol in its 4-point rhythm. So that's in the morning, at noon, in the afternoon, and in the evening. And this gives us a full picture of the cortisol pattern. And ideally, we want cortisol to peak in the morning, and that's what allows us to feel wakeful. That is what allows us to feel alert. That is also what essentially happens first thing in the morning as a means of releasing blood sugar because we haven't eaten all night. So there's a lot of mechanisms that are there, and this largely explains the concept of our circadian rhythm. So our circadian rhythm is our biological clock, and this is so incredibly important. And unfortunately, so many of us have dysregulated circadian rhythms, but it's ideally going to show elevated cortisol in the morning at its peak, and then a diminishing of cortisol throughout the day with melatonin releasing in the evening. And so, what's fascinating here is we don't test melatonin in the evening. We test melatonin at noon, and that's going to be drawn from this same test. And it's not because of the fact that we don't think that melatonin release in the evening is important. Cortisol allows us to infer what that relationship looks like because when cortisol is suppressed, melatonin can be released. We're looking at melatonin at noon for the sake of immunity and for the sake of immune health. So I'll get into that. And obviously, if you have elevated melatonin at noon, that can tell us something and you probably will feel tired. So that makes sense, but that's more about immune function. I'll get into it. So for the sake of my results, like I said, ideally we want to see that peak of cortisol in the morning and then a gradual progression throughout the rest of the day so that in the evening we're able to get to sleep. That is the ideal curve. I also have an image of the ideal curve versus what my curve looked like, and I'll try to articulate it for you so that I can hopefully give you that picture. But I'm also happy to share it with anyone if anyone wants to see it. But this is something that you'll be provided in your test results as well. You'll be able to compare between, okay, where do I fall and where is the ideal? Sometimes it's a little jarring to see like, holy cow, I'm completely off. Mine wasn't too bad, so I was feeling good about it. But also, I think too, I've been working on a protocol around my cortisol because I worked with another practitioner. So I think maybe some of that explains why my numbers looked as normal, we'll say, or as ideal as they did. Not perfect. Still have a lot of work to do, but they looked better than maybe what they could have been. But I'll leave that. I won't keep going down that route. So anyways, my morning reading was a 9.5. Now, according to the test results, the preferred range is 2.7 to 4.5. So immediately right off the bat, we see that my morning cortisol is elevated. Now, as a practitioner, we have to inquire about why. Why is this the case, right? And it's not clear cut. It's not straightforward. And that's why all of these tests, excuse me, oh my goodness, hold on, let me get a sip of water. That's why all of these tests are so important because it helps us really get a full picture of, say, for example, why is it that I have elevated cortisol? Now, there is a chance that morning, this was March 20th, there's a chance that morning I was particularly stressed. Maybe I woke up and got a text that caused me stress, or maybe I woke up and opened a bill that I wasn't expecting and that caused me stress. So there's a lot of potentials there for like context. And so always, always, always asking the client, was there anything that happened on that day that was particularly stressful? Ideally, we're going to run these tests on days that are pretty average and pretty normal, but you can't always control that. Right? So I thought back, this was the Thursday morning. I remember I took off work because I wanted to get ahead on tax related things. And so I said, no, there was nothing abnormally stressful. Now, I did say, I do have a tendency to reach for my phone first thing in the morning, and that can be stressful. I did say maybe the stress of the test caused some irregularity. I did say, maybe the stress of not having caffeine. We're not supposed to have caffeine or exercise on the day of the test. Now, exercise is not a problem for me to do without, but caffeine. I mean, I literally just posted on Instagram. I thought, oh my God, this is actually funny. I posted on Instagram, it's sick how excited I wake up for my coffee. So maybe my body was, expecting the caffeine. I didn't get the caffeine. Maybe that caused stress in me. I don't know. There can be a number of things here, but there can also be a parasite. There could also be, a parasite that is more active overnight that typically is what happens, and that caused an elevation in the cortisol. I mean, there's so many factors that we have to consider as to why there might be an elevation. What we do know is the fact that my adrenals can produce cortisol, and that's a good thing. We know that even if it's an irregular elevation and there's dysfunction there, and that's considered a healing opportunity, we know my adrenals are capable of producing cortisol. So we're happy about that. Okay, we like that. We'd like to see that. So from 9.5 in the afternoon and noon, we'll say, it goes noon to afternoon. I went from a 9.5 to a 1.3. Now, 1.3 is technically in the normal range. The normal range, preferred range, we'll say, is 0.8 to 1.3. So yes, technically I'm in a normal range, but what's problematic about this is the drop. The fact that I went from 9.5 to 1.3, that is a drop, because ideally at the higher end of the preferred range would be 4.5 in the morning. So I'm going from 4.5 to a steady decline to 1.3. All right, not bad. But I am well above that. I am 5 points ahead of the preferred range. So that's where it would make sense that I'm starting to feel tired or maybe low energy in this part of the day, even if I fall in the normal range. And that's why the 4-point cortisol test is so important. Because if you tested my cortisol at noon and it said 1.3, we'll just use that as an example, the doctor would say, no, your cortisol came back normal. But little does this person know, I started at 9.5 and now I dropped to 1.3. So having that opportunity to look at that progression is enormous, right? Because it does explain why first thing in the morning, aka right in this moment, I feel like I can conquer the world. I said that yesterday or Monday when I was doing my review. I said, I wake up first thing in the morning. I'm not like, holy cow, like I'm so happy to get out of bed. However, once I'm out and I'm on my computer or I'm reading or I'm doing whatever, I feel like I could become president of the United States. I swear to God, I'm like ready to go. Let's go. Let's take on the day. And then it starts to get into like the 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. area. And that's when things start to kind of calm down a bit, if you will. So if this all makes sense, we would say this clinically correlates. So then moving into the afternoon, I fall into the normal range at 0.8, and then in the evening, I have a 0.6. So all of them are on the higher end of the preferred range, but still within the normal range. Now, when we total this up, this puts me into a cortisol sum of 12.2. So looking at this cortisol sum, this will help us understand where we fall in terms of the phase, we'll say, within the world of dysregulation when it comes to the HPA axis and cortisol as a whole. So ideally, we want to be in homeostasis. We want to be in a spot where we can respond effectively to a stressor, and we're able to do that in an acute way. And then we can bring ourselves back to homeostasis. That is what the stress response is meant for. But unfortunately, because of the world we live in and because we're under chronic stress, this is not the case anymore. So we can fall into a couple different categories here. We can be in the acute phase, we can be in the compensatory phase, and we can be in the exhaustive phase. And this helps us better understand essentially how far along we are. Okay, so for me personally, my cortisol sum put me in the acute phase, which usually reflects as elevated cortisol, but this could also mean I might have only a few or no symptoms at all. This also tells us a lot about what we call vital reserve. So this allows me to then better conceptualize, okay, where is this person at and how much do they have left to give in their tank to handle stress, to handle the impact of all of this dysfunction and these imbalances. If I'm in the acute phase, my reserve is probably a little bit more sufficient in comparison to somebody who's in the exhaustive phase where they probably have little left to give. So depending on your cortisol sum, we will be able to put you in either the acute compensatory or exhaustive phase. And then that will then help us better understand what your protocol will look like for sure, because somebody who's in the acute phase will not have the same guidance as somebody who's in the exhaustive phase. And then also looking at all the factors that typically surround each phase. We want to correlate with what the experience is like, and it helps us just better understand what's going on with the adrenals and how can we best support them given the fact that they are so far along or they are so exhausted. Because even, for example, being in the exhaustive phase, you'll see low cortisol. And I feel like a lot of people think, oh, it has to be high cortisol. Like high cortisol is what happens when we're really stressed out. It's no, I mean, this is who knows how long this has been going on. And eventually your adrenals get to a point where it's like, I'm exhausted. That's how you can look at it. There's just no gas left in the tank. And this is typically where things are really awry. We're really not feeling good. And there's all sorts of dysfunction present. And we'll see, depleted reserves, lots of cortisol dysregulation factors, and a lot of other issues that clients will likely say, I'm not feeling well. Like overall, that'll be the general energy. And we obviously want to support them in whatever phase that they're in. So, moving on from discussing the fact that I am in fact in the acute phase, we then look at the cortisol pattern evaluation. And I'm going to talk about this quickly because I want to be able to take time to spend on the other hormones. What we see here is the way that the cortisol is broken down as far as its release over the course of the day, but it's presented via percentages. So I want you to imagine 100% of the cortisol existing within a bank account. And according to my results, I release 77.9% of my cortisol first thing in the morning. But we're supposed to be releasing preferably 64.3% first thing in the morning. So think about it. If I'm taking that we'll say $78 from my bank account and I'm releasing it, I'm spending it first thing in the morning, that only leaves $22 left to be spent for the rest of the day, when in reality, there should be $36 left. Is that math right? Yeah, that math's right. In the bank account to spend for the rest of the day. So think about it in that regard. This just gives us another illustration of how my body is utilizing cortisol over the course of the day. And then that would explain why noon, afternoon, and night, we are under the ideal percentage. So at noon, it falls at 10.7% when I should be at 18.8%. At afternoon, it's 6.6%, and I should be at 14.3%. So it gives us a better illustration of where the deficit lies, as to the fact that I'm releasing so much in the morning, and then there's little left over for the remainder of the day. We then look at the graph that shows the preferred range, and then it shows where I fall. So the only real red flag here is the drop from morning to noon, which is what I just discussed. And then if you could see this visual right now, you'd see that my pattern pretty much normalizes from the afternoon into the evening. Like they overlap pretty well. Still not perfect, still not in the ideal range, but still better than it could be. So this just gives us a visual to be able to understand where we would like to be, where we can work towards being, and where we are. Then we look at some of our other hormones. DHEA is an anabolic hormone. It is the parent to a lot of our well-known hormones, estrogen, testosterone. And I fall at 3.64, and the preferred range is 1.7 to 3.6. So while I'm not extremely over the preferred range, I'm still in an elevated, it still constitutes as being elevated because it's 6.4 versus 3.60. Then we want to really focus on the cortisol to DHEA ratio. Now, our body has a system of checks and balances in a number of ways. It's kind of like our good and bad bacteria in our gut. We don't want too little, we don't want too much, we want just enough. It's like estrogen to progesterone, and in this case, it's cortisol to DHEA. Now, cortisol is a catabolic hormone, which means it is responsible for breaking down, where an anabolic hormone like DHEA is what builds us up. So we don't want too much breaking down and we don't want too much building up. We want a healthy check and balance between the two. So in this case, my cortisol to DHEA ratio is 3.4, which is elevated. So that means I'm cortisol dominant, which puts me in a more catabolic state. So like I said, we don't want to be cortisol dominant. We don't want to be DHEA dominant. We want to have a healthy ratio there. And based on the comparison of my cortisol sum with my DHEA, we see that there is imbalance there. And that can explain a number of different things. That can explain why I have trouble with muscle recovery. That can explain why I may be more fatigued. That can explain a number of issues that correlate with that sum. Now, if we keep going, we look at estradiol, which is a form of estrogen, and we measure this during my luteal phase. So we're looking at these test results between day 19 and 21 of a premenopausal woman. For men, doesn't matter when we test. For postmenopausal women, doesn't matter when we test. Okay. So my estradiol was at 9.2. The ideal range is 4.8 to 8.4. So we definitely see some elevation there. Now, this can be for a number of reasons. This can be due to either liver congestion. This can be due to, poor digestion. This can be due to a number of different things. So we can't necessarily make any immediate, oh, this is why this is happening, but it's still a clue. It gives us an opportunity to say, all right, it's elevated. Now, I already know that I have poor detox, and I know that through my genetic testing. So obviously, I am more attuned to that than maybe the average person is. And this is something I've been working on for years. I talk a lot about liver health. So, little surprised that there's an elevation, but I would maybe even argue that it probably would be higher if I wasn't doing the work that I was doing for my liver health. Now, looking at our sex hormones can be really helpful. And a lot of times this is more within that gray area because our sex hormones during times of stress are expendable. So usually we're seeing disruptions there before full-blown issues occur. And so in this case, obviously my estradiol is elevated, and we also want to consider our estradiol in relation to progesterone, and then also looking at testosterone. So we'll look at my progesterone, which was 47.4, which is extremely low next to the preferred range. The preferred range is 215.9 to 332.6. So your girl is very low in the progesterone department. So if we look at our estradiol to progesterone or progesterone to estradiol, we are seeing some estrogen dominance, which is very common in women. It is the culprit in many cases for heavy menstrual cycles or painful periods. It is so common, and unfortunately, we're not recognizing it enough in reproductive health and reproductive health care. And it's a shame. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we are overburdening our livers, and our livers can't do their job. So we end up finding ourselves in a state of estrogen dominance because estrogen is recirculated through the body because it's not being excreted, and that's leading to all sorts of issues. Now, you can still have low estrogen and still be estrogen dominant. So this is important to keep in mind, that you can still be estrogen dominant. It's a matter of what your progesterone to estradiol ratio looks like that determines if it's estrogen dominance. So keep that in mind if you're doing your own investigating here. And then moving on to testosterone, I am at 27.2, and the reference range is 27.1 to 49. So still on the lower end of the reference range, but still, still in the normal range, still in the preferred range. And, obviously, maybe if we tested in another month, maybe that would look differently. Maybe it would look lower. We don't know. It could look higher, who knows. But when it comes to something like this, when it's in the normal range and there's nothing really kind of drawn from it, we call it a non-clue. So we're kind of just looking at it as, all right, it's in the normal range. We can obviously consider it in reflection of all these other hormones. Maybe this is lower than what it was 6 months ago. Who knows? I have been saying that I have been having issues with my muscle recovery, which I know I mentioned as it relates to cortisol and the catabolic state, but also having low testosterone can result in this as well. But I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if this is something that's starting to drop, because we know DHEA is the parent hormone of these hormones. So if I have not necessarily low DHEA, but if I'm in more of a cortisol state and a cortisol dominant state, and my DHEA is maybe suppressed to some extent, that would then sacrifice the production of these primary sex hormones. So you see how it all kind of all interrelates, and you kind of have to see it all from like this bird's eye view, as opposed to just focusing and fixating on just the one result. Next, my melatonin at noon was 0.1. The ideal range is 0 to 5, so we're good. That is a non-clue as well. As I said before, if my melatonin was elevated, that's where we want to draw our attention, because what happens when melatonin is elevated in the afternoon? Not only are we going to feel tired, but it's also a boost for the immune system. And so the immune system is calling on melatonin in the afternoon to come in as backup, as an immune boost. And so that's, if it's elevated, then we know there's immune dysfunction going on, right? So when it's elevated at noon, which is when we measure it, you'd probably think, oh, that's weird. Why don't you measure it at night? Well, we're looking at it for a different reason, essentially. We're looking at it through the lens of the immune system. If it is elevated in the afternoon, then we know that there's something going on in that department. Next, my SIG-A, which essentially is like the bouncer of the club, and the club being the mucosal barriers in my body. We have tons of mucosal barriers in our mouth, in our noses, our vaginal barrier. The list goes on. Tons of them. So SIG-A is essentially the oh my God, the word I'm looking for, the bouncer to monitor who comes in and what goes out, right? Mine is exceptionally low. 128 to 223 is the ideal range. I'm at 18.5. So that is pretty telling. Okay. And she even asked me, do you have hard time recovering from colds or like respiratory issues? And at first I was like, no, I don't think so. And then I thought about it. I'm like, wait a second. Yeah, I sometimes do. Like when I get sick, which I don't get sick very often, when I get sick, which is interesting too, because you test SIG-A also through your stool, and those are two different markers. And my SIG-A, I think, was normal and healthy in my microbiome, but in my saliva, that was where it was low. But it's interesting because I do feel like my coughs and my colds and my mucus and whatever, that all kind of lingers. So thought that was fascinating because I definitely resonated with that. So that's really important, right? Looking at SIG-A, which is a marker of our immune health, and kind of that barrier, or that, I think the best way to describe it is a bouncer, right? And when it comes to having low SIG-A, this means that bouncer is sleeping on the job, it took a vacation, right? Versus if it's highly, highly elevated, that means that it's overactive, right? That this bouncer is being too picky and is fighting people and is kicking people out and not let anyone in, and or kicking too many people out, or whatever the case is. So using that analogy has been really helpful for me to like conceptualize and to deliver the information. So now moving into the metabolic wellness profile. So these are 3 markers. We're going to look at indican, which is a determinant of protein digestion. Total bile acids, which is a good reflection of liver health and detox, and then 8-OH-DG, which is a marker of oxidative stress. So indican is a really great way for us to understand more about digestion. And if we are having issues within the world of digesting protein, that is going to impact every system in the body, because if we're not able to break down protein into amino acids and utilize them as needed, this is going to cause a lot of dysfunction. This can look like a number of things. It can look like difficulty creating neurotransmitters. Certain amino acids are essential for a certain phase in liver detox, so that can be hugely influenced. It can be influencing on our gut lining. It can be influencing on our muscle health. It can be influencing across the board. There's a lot of impact there. So in my case, I had elevated indican, which is not the goal, 86.52. And the goal is to go from 0 to 59.6. So I was elevated. And this essentially means that if there's indican detected in the urine, this is what we call putrefaction of protein. And that means that it's a certain byproduct that is produced that's not taken care of in the body when it should be. And that's what is excreted via urine. So if we're seeing elevation in this marker called indican, then we know that there is malfunctioning happening in the breakdown of protein. Okay. So this is really important. Now, where this problem is happening, we don't know. Digestion is a lengthy process. So that's also important to consider too. Through other markers, we can make educated guesses based on other, other markers that reflect, say, in your GI map, you see that there's, a certain type of dysbiosis that's there, that could explain it, right? Because what we know is that opportunistic bacteria, which we consider the bad guys, they are attracted to this putrefaction of protein. Okay, so any kind of dysbiosis there might lead us to believe, right? There's a number of different reasons as to why this could be a problem, right? Where we have maybe not enough digestive enzymes or whatever the case is, but it's all interrelated. Okay, so I have elevation there, which would maybe explain why I'm more prone to anxiety, why I am having trouble, keeping and recover or keeping on. I don't think I'm having trouble keeping on muscle. I'm having trouble with muscle recovery. This can result in a number of factors because amino acids are so incredibly important. And if my body is not utilizing protein the way that it should, this is a problem. Okay. Next is total bile acids. Now, this one surprised me. So this basically shows us what in the world is going on with our liver. And it is a good marker to look at liver congestion. So urinary bile acid levels let us know how much bile acids are spilling over into general circulation. So to give you kind of the basics here, bile acids, which make up 80% of our bile, they're made in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and they're secreted into the intestines and partially recirculated back to the liver. Okay, some bile, a small percentage, is lost through our feces, but then a healthy liver replenishes the supply of bile available for digestion, especially fat. So ideally, in a healthy person, we should find that the bile acids are low. And elevated bile acid levels can point to a lot of issues and what we call healing opportunities, whether that has to do with the liver, the gallbladder, or anywhere throughout that process of detox. So when we find UBAs in our urine, this is a good indicator, like I said, of liver and gallbladder function. And excessive bile acids tend to spill over or leach into general circulation. And then that's when we see it coming out in our urine. So high levels are going to mean that there's excess bile that's spilling over into the bloodstream and then excreted in our urine. And this can reflect liver congestion. There's just too many people in line at the liver, and the bile acids are unable to get in, which is causing that spillover. And then lower than normal values may reflect issues with the gallbladder. Maybe someone doesn't have a gallbladder, maybe they have poor bile flow. So lots of information can be gleaned from this result. Mine reflected healthy and normal, which is shocking because I have gallbladder issues and I tend to have issues with my liver, or suspected. So I was interested to see that I fell in the normal range. So once again, that would reflect as a non-clue, right? It's information. Obviously, we can look at it, we can consider it. But the healthy range is 8.0 to 10.9, and I fell at 9.04. So we just move on from that. Then lastly, the 8-OH-DG is a marker of oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress can be present within the entire body. This can cause DNA damage. This can accelerate aging. This is something we want to be very conscious of. And just like there's kind of like a checks and balances with the hormones I mentioned, with pro-oxidation and anti-oxidation, that's important too. And pro-oxidation is essentially a normal part of the body's functioning, but we want enough antioxidant power to come in and neutralize that impact. And if that is not the case, if we don't have that antioxidant support, whether it's through dysfunction in the body or we're not eating enough antioxidants, this can result in some issues. So for me, I was above the range. I do know I have trouble with this area. This is what I learned from my genetic testing. So I wasn't totally surprised by it. But 11.85 was where I fell, and the range is 0 to 8.8. So I was elevated there, and this will be addressed, obviously, in the protocol. But what I want to say about this is this can kind of tie into any issue that we're seeing in the body, right? It's all, we can find oxidative stress in all areas of the body. So it's just a good number to have, and then we can use that as an opportunity for healing. I think too, from like a clinical correlation standpoint, when it comes to someone's symptoms, oxidative stress can influence any and all symptoms. So that's also important to consider. But there's also, an opportunity for us to look at what is promoting this. I mean, things like overexercise or environmental toxins or eating foods like fried foods and so forth, like all of that can generate that within the body. So we want to focus on what are the factors in our control. And then also what is promoting internally this free radical damage. How can we up our antioxidant intake? There's a number of different things that can be considered here. So when it comes to the indican, bile acids, and 8-OH-DG, these are single markers that say a lot, but they can all interrelate with each other and all the other markers in a really interesting way. What we know is the GI map does a really great job at complementing some of these markers as well, just because of how closely tied our microbiome and our gut health is with our liver, as well as the mucosal barrier assessment, because that's looking at the health and the integrity of our gut lining. So all of these markers put together can give us a really beautiful picture of what's going on in the detox and digestive department, which are massive, massive, massive processes that exist within the body and determine a lot of how we feel and how we function, right? You think about it. If digestion is responsible for the food that we eat becoming what we need and what our body needs to optimally function, and if there's any issues there, then of course there's going to be problems. There's going to be malnutrition, malabsorption. If we can't utilize protein, if we can't utilize fat, if we're having trouble in these arenas, then obviously we're not going to feel so good, right? And then same with detox. I think that's hugely underlooked and underconsidered in the world of health. And if our body is not able to break down and release the toxins, the hormones, the stress, the this, the that, all of that, and it can't do that job properly, and those issues are just recirculating in the body, or the liver is overwhelmed, or whatever the case is, that's also going to cause issues. So looking at these markers can be incredibly valuable. And then we know like any dysfunction here can then influence our hormones. And if there's impact in our hormones and the chemical messengers of the body, then you can imagine there's going to be dysfunction in our body's ability to function. If the messengers are not doing what they need to do because they're disrupted based on our detox or digestion, or vice versa, it's a pretty interesting and intricate picture that we're looking at. So this is a little bit of a taste of what we're working with here. Overall, what I took away is there's some work to be done for me from a hormone perspective. I definitely think it's much better than I thought it maybe would be. So I'm happy with my results in that regard, that I know what I can address there. And then curious about the immune function piece and why it's so low. So that is something that I'm very curious and interested to dive into deeper. But then when it relates to detox and digestion, the protein issue is really what fascinates me, because you know how I feel about protein, but I'm learning that my body is not utilizing it the way that it could. So just imagine how much of an improvement there will be in how I feel when my body's actually able to take advantage of the protein that I'm eating. You aren't what you eat, you are what you absorb. Remember that. So you can be eating your protein and not being able to utilize it properly, and you wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even know it. So I hope that this was helpful to give you some insight on all the things. And there's a lot more individual support that's obviously accompanying of this, where we look at your metabolic chaos scorecard and pinpoint the symptoms that really correlate. Obviously, with the indicant being elevated, there can be digestive issues. There can be, like I said, mood issues. There can be a number of kind of corresponding symptoms that might relate to that alone, just because of how important protein is. So just looking at that alone can be huge. And then the bile acids, same thing. I mean, liver congestion, that is impactful on so much of how we feel. I mean, that can impact imbalances in our hormones, that can impact our fatigue, that can impact our neurological health. I mean, that can impact so many things. And then same with the 8-OH-DG, looking at oxidative stress. And, that I think I notice primarily in my skin. Weird to say, but like premature skin aging, I feel like that's something I notice. That could also just be my poor SPF use as a teenager, but definitely notice that. So I'm curious about that as well. But nonetheless, this is just a brief overview of it. I hope it was helpful. I hope it gave you some insight on if testing would be something you'd be interested in. I think everyone should do this. I think we should all have access to it. So obviously, being a little biased, I can't really say otherwise, but I will dive into the remaining tests next time on the podcast. This will be a series, because obviously we're already at an hour and there's just no way for me to go through everything else. But the information to sign up for testing is in the show notes. Like I said, this is just an inquiry list. It's more of a wait list than it is, I'm, signing my life away to this test, to these tests. It's simply a way for you to get on the list, to learn more, and then to be the first to know when it's available. So please feel free to fill that out. That always lives in the link tree in my bio too, on Instagram and on TikTok. So if you misplace this episode, you can always go there. That's always going to live there. And then always reach out. My email is in the show notes. So send me an email if you have questions, if you are curious, if you're not sure, happy to answer those for you. So thank you for being here. I will also do an episode on the protocol. So okay, Emily, you have all these test results. So what now? What does the protocol look like? So I'll share with that, especially going into my GI map and what was uncovered there. So that will be a fun episode. But thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed, and until next time, be well.